Hey, Lucas. So, welcome. Thanks so much for coming on and being on our channel. And like I was saying, I viewed your page and I seen your, what is it, bodyhealingarts.com? Beyond?
Beyond body healing arts. So the idea there, beyond body, is that we're using the body as the vehicle for awakening, but these practices take us to a place beyond the body.
Yeah. So it's kind of you're using the body and the energies to get free, sort of to get free of the body or to get beyond it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, I have to tell everybody Lucas was really saying some amazing stuff and I was really transfixed, but I forgot to record it. So I have to go back through it with him again real quick. And so basically the first question I asked you was, the different martial arts forms that you practice. And I know you teach it as well. And so the Taichi and the Qigong and everything, if you could kind of tell us again what the purpose of that is with the energy and how the practice works in your life.
Right. So I think I mentioned there's two kind of main aspects to the practice. One is cultivating our original nature, our spiritual nature, which is found throughout all spiritual traditions. That's kind of the point of spiritual practice. And then the other one that is really emphasized and is somewhat unique to the Taoist practice, not exclusively, is the cultivating vitality. So there's some schools of thought out there that, the body isn't ultimately real, so we can just ignore the body. No point in, cultivating vitality because it's going to go away. It's going to die anyways. And that's fine. And a lot of those methods are very effective at cultivating our spiritual nature. But inevitably, if we're not also cultivating vitality, we end up getting sick. The body ends up getting injured.
So that's in stark contrast to, say, austerity practices where people hurt their body or injure themselves and stuff like that. This is almost completely opposite, you would say, right?
Yeah. The one of the things that we're really orienting to is following what's nourishing. So it's a practice where, our body is one of our greatest teachers. So we listen to the body instead of ignore it. I made the analogy that I don't think got recorded about the chi. The chi supports the spirit. So if the chi is sick and injured, the spirit's not going to be as bright. And the analogy is that the chi is like the horse, spirit is like the rider. So if the horse is wild and untamed, it's going to take the rider with it, right? So if our chi is wild, is erratic, the mind will also be erratic. So likewise, if it's sick and injured, not going to be able to go very far, right? So by properly cultivating the chi, it gives us this foundation for the spirit. There's three treasures in Daoism is Jing, Qi, Shen. So the Jing is our ancestral energy, oftentimes associated with the sexual fluids. The Jing is the foundation, and then we can use that to transform it into Qi. And Qi is the mother of spirit.
So Qi is sort of is the feminine energy. Could you say that, or how would you put it?
There's yin qi and there's yang qi.
Okay. Because I've heard, or a better way I could say this, I used to do these meditations by Eckhart Tolle, and his wife would actually speak them, but she would say, use it as a synonym for prana or life energy. She would say, or chi. So would you say those words, those terms could be kind of synonymous depending on what tradition you're in?
Yeah. Those are fairly synonymous. You know, I've found some slight differences reading some of the ways that people are explaining prana, but yeah, basically.
Okay. And then you were talking about, you were getting into the energy when I had asked you the question about the chakras and the energy centers. Did you want to get into that a little bit? You were talking about.
Oh, yeah, the dantian. So the main centers that we work with in the internal alchemical practice are what we call dantians, which means elixir field. And the idea here, it's kind of like an analogy. So alchemy, right? This like external alchemy. We take these two crude substances, I think it's usually lead and cinnabar or mercury, combine them in this particular way to get gold, is the idea. So in the body, we have various types of energy moving through the body, various types of chi. And through this practice, we basically purify, cleanse the body, and then we cultivate, we gather chi, and we gather into these the dantian. There's 3 main dantians that we use, and these can vary based upon Qigong systems, but generally upper, middle, and a lower dantian. And so we combine this energy in the dantian, and we cultivate this golden elixir, which we can circulate throughout the body for healing. We can use it for healing others, and there is a spiritual cultivation aspect to it as well.
Can I ask you 2 things? One, how long have you been practicing for?
I've been doing Taoist practice since 2010.
2010. Okay. I do regularly pranayama practices, which I don't know if you're familiar with, but which work with breathing and is said also to purify mind and body and work with the energies of the body. So the thing that I find interesting about, the different energies are talking about that is that, of course, you can't see them with the naked eye. So what would you say? Would you say that they're more subtle where they're there, but of course, there's no scientific equipment. You can't take an x-ray and see this going through your body. So it's sort of a spiritual energy, would you say, that's on a different, it's here, but it's also sort of on a different plane?
Well, everything is chi, and we all experience chi. We just don't know that that's what we're experiencing because of the particular framework that we've been given, and especially as it's kind of like come over, this concept's kind of come over to the West. It's kind of been interchanged with the word energy, which it's not incorrect, but it's not exactly it. There's a lot of Qigong teachers out there that, they don't use the word energy. They just call it chi because it's not really energy. It's just,
they don't want it to
chi.
get misconstrued.
Yeah, so there's so we all experience chi, when you first wake up in the morning and you've gotten good rest, the chi has sunk deep into the body, you've gotten good rest, and then you wake up and it's bright and clear and you're ready to go for the day. That's chi. Same when you start to get tired at night, chi starts to sink, starts to to go deeper inside, and you get tired. And so that's the qi. You drink coffee, you get a little jittery, or a little hyped up, and that's the qi. You get angry, and your face gets red, and the qi's going up into the head. So that's qi. Emotions are qi. Emotions are just energetic patterns of movement in the body, right?
So basically, you're saying qi is everything that we experience, really.
Yes, absolutely.
And so, like I told you, I told you before I lost the recording, but when I first got into recovery, I was a big student of the Tao Te Ching. I'd read all the translations on it, and I loved it, and it helped me a lot. And, from most people's perspective, that's like what they associate mainly with Daoism. But, in that text specifically, there's not mentions of, really meditative or different practices as such. So do you have a history on it all?
So I haven't actually studied the Tao Te Ching extensively, but I do know that if you're doing the alchemical practice and you read those texts, they are instruction manuals. So it's hidden. If you don't know what to look for, then you don't see it, basically.
I see what you're saying. So it's kind of like embedded in the text. I think a lot of holy books are sort of like that, where they could be understood on many different levels depending on, where the practitioner is at.
I have a friend who's a longtime internal alchemical practitioner, and he's read the Bible extensively, and he says it's an alchemical text, the Bible. Jesus practiced internal alchemy. So yeah, it's in there in all of them, and once you get the transmission and start to understand the practice, then you start to see what it is that these mystics in all the world's traditions are kind of actually talking about, right?
Yeah, I liked how you said that, because I go to a Kriya Yoga temple, which is a meditative form of yoga that Yogananda brought from India in the early 1900s to the United States. And that's one of the main practices that I do. And I've read some books from there, and their different gurus and teachers also do commentaries on the Old and New Testaments of the Bible and talk about how the underlying principles, like how it's talking about Kriya Yoga and stuff in there. So that's what's interesting. It relates with what you were just saying.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, go
ahead. It's really beautiful, this age that we're in, where we have access to all of these teachers and all of these traditions. And when we start to understand the essence of what it is that they're talking about, we can see how they're all saying the same thing, really.
Yes, that's the first thing I had noticed. It was like that it was all talking about the same thing. And sometimes I'd confuse myself a little bit, because the ways of speaking about it vary and some of the terms vary, but I realized that ultimately it was pointing to the same truth. It was all talking about the same thing. And that's why when I was a child, I used to get confused, because I grew up in a Christian church, and we weren't deeply devout or anything Christians, but I used to get confused because basically the consensus was you believe in Jesus as the savior and everybody else is going to hell or whatever. And so I didn't understand that, because I was like, but there's people all over the world that grew up in different systems or didn't get exposed to that, and why would they be wrong or hurt? So I think there could be a lot of confusion there. And sometimes people cite Jesus saying, I and the Father are one, or I am the way and the truth and the life. Nobody comes to the Father except through me. But I realized he was talking about, he wasn't talking about himself specifically as Jesus, but he was talking about that Christ consciousness. Like nobody comes
Yeah.
into it except through that. And he wasn't saying, I'm the only way, me personally.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful.
So
Yeah, it's like in all the traditions, it's the mystics of all the traditions that all have this common understanding. But then there's is the term orthodox. The more there's people that take the words more literally instead of seeing the real message behind it, and then it gets misconstrued and used as a tool for control, manipulation, and an excuse for genocide and all kinds of other atrocities. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of it. And then words only, words kind of fail us eventually. So words only go so far. And then these people have these experiences and realize these things, and then they try to put it into words for other people to understand. And it always is kind of a little lost in translation.
Yeah.
So what I wanted to ask you too, a couple other things is I seen also, other than just martial arts, you do Thai massage, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but craniosacral massage, is that how you would pronounce it?
Craniosacral therapy, yeah, specifically biodynamic craniosacral therapy. And then I do all sorts of various other types of tissue work. Thai massage is one of the modalities. I actually haven't been studying that one too extensively recently, a bit more in the connective tissue therapy realm, which is similar to Rolfing. A lot of people know that one. Rolfing, structural integration, those kinds of things.
So does that tie in, because obviously it sounds a little bit different than just your average massage. Does that tie into your spiritual practice or your anything like that? Does it tie into anything with the Tai Chi?
Absolutely, especially the biodynamic craniosacral therapy. I think of that one as mysticism applied to the healing field. With biodynamic work, so that term biodynamic, life meaning life rhythms. And do you know anything about biodynamic farming?
No.
So I don't know a ton about it, but I think I'm correct when I say this stuff, is that the idea behind biodynamic farming is that you have this area of land, and by paying attention to the natural rhythms of life, there's a way to harmonize that piece of land so that everything that it needs for nourishment is contained in that land. You don't have to go to the store and bring things in. You don't have to buy stuff and bring it in. It's all there, and it's this it's a system that's completely whole in itself. So yeah, I mean, sounds pretty mystical already, right? So biodynamic craniosacral therapy is a practice where one of the main ideas is that wholeness is inherent in each and every one of us. And so when a person is held properly, they already have everything inside of them that they need for healing. Healing always happens from the inside out. It's never an outside-in thing. Even when we're talking about surgery, right, which is basically the most invasive type of medicine out there, is that the doctor may be the one that makes the cut and weaves things back together or whatever, but it's totally up to the body's resources that it has inside of it if it's going to take that condition, right? That's a condition, and if it's going to take that condition and it's going to heal itself. So there's a quote, it might be from Dr. Still, the developer of osteopathy, that life heals itself given the proper conditions. So it's really about getting out of the way. It's about applying the right condition and getting out of the way so that health can do what it naturally does and be healthy. That kind of makes sense?
Yeah, it does. And now here's a break with a message from our sponsors. Are you tired of paying too much to H&R Block or others to prepare your tax return? Are you finally done pulling your hairs out over TurboTax or worrying about whether you completed your Form 1040 correctly? Well, worry no longer. With Mom Silvic Tax and Accounting, you're in great hands. With over 35 years of experience and over 250 clients to show for, CPA Mile Momsilvich is the accountant you can trust. Straightforward, inexpensive, professional. All it takes is 3 easy steps. Step 1, email or text us for more information. Step 2, receive an invite email to load your data. Step 3, review and sign your returns electronically in a safe and secure way. The best part about it, he can do your taxes and accounting no matter what state you're in. If you want a knowledgeable licensed expert, he's your guy, with tax returns starting at $125 for single filers and $150 for joint filers. You are guaranteed a fair price and excellent service. Stop the worrying and leave it up to the professional. Email Mile at info@momsilvicaccounting.com, text him at 773-578-0996, or go to momsilvicaccounting.com. Website link and contact information can be found in the description below. To learn more, follow Mom Silvic Tax and Accounting on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn. Also, if you have any tax or accounting related questions, feel free to contact Mile free of charge. And it reminds me of another thing I was thinking of when you were talking about Daoism is, from what I understand and from what I've studied in other traditions, there's a lot of focus on sort of non-doing or non-action or wu wei, the way of not trying. And I think I'd seen that mentioned on your page as well, but I'm not positive. But can you tell us maybe what your understanding, do you have a philosophy behind that, or what your understanding is of non-action?
I just saw a Muji quote. It says, "Life takes care of itself." So, so how to maybe cultivate true non-doing? There's that term wei wu wei. So do non-doing. So at first, on the path, we have to. We've come from this place of self volition, of will, of like, I'm the one doing this stuff, I've got to do these things in order to make money so that I can survive, and if I don't do these things, then I'm gonna die or I'm gonna suffer. So when we first start on the path, we always have to start where we're at. Right? So we have to take that efforting, that doing, and we do non-doing. So we apply that efforting basically to surrender. But the thing is, you can't use your will to surrender. It's that eventually by So when we're using the will and we're doing things and then we accomplish things and we're doing things and we accomplish things, it's a self-perpetuating cycle. But when we start to turn that around, to use the will to not do, it eventually will actually exhaust the will, exhaust the will of the separate self. And when that will is fully exhausted, then true will, true doing, which is non-doing, can manifest through us. When we finally get out of the way, when awareness stops, when awareness lets go of its misidentification with the separate self, when this idea of a separate self falls away, then true non-doing is something that just happens through us. Oh, quote from the Tao Te Ching popped into my head. I think I can remember it. So the sage does less and less until finally nothing is done. And when nothing is done, nothing is left undone. So my experience of this is that when I thought I was the one doing it and had to do it, I was constantly getting in the way of myself. There was this like double bind of like, I want this thing to happen, like why won't it happen? And then that efforting to make it happen actually makes it not happen because there's this like thing that's happening. And as I started orienting more and more to non-doing, then it eventually gets to this place where all of these things just start moving through without attachment to them, without personal desire. So because there's this non-resistance to whatever's arising, it manifests completely without effort.
And I think I like that. I think that's beautiful saying. I think that's beautiful what you just said. And that's one thing that I think is a little bit missing in Western religion. Not, I think it's there if you look deep enough, but not really spoken about as opposed to we're in the East. I think it is more. And a couple things that I thought of, and you could tell me if this relates to what you were saying, but I also study the Bhagavad Gita a lot, which is, are you familiar with that text at all?
I've read a little bit of it many years ago.
Okay, so that's one book I like a lot. And in there's Krishna says, all action takes place by the interweaving of the forces of nature, but man, in his selfish delusion, thinks himself the actor. So that was one thing that I thought of. And I had quoted that once in a philosophy class I was in, actually. And they were like, what are you talking about? But it reminded me of that. And then it reminded me of the Buddha. In the Buddha's teaching, he said, in Buddhism, the idea is to get free from the cycle of births and deaths. And he says, in one of his talks, he said, he who thinks himself the doer can never be free from the cycle of birth and death.
Yeah. Accurate.
Yeah, I like that. 'Cause I think it's so tricky that, because most of us, we think we're really, like you said, we think we're the one really forcing things, and we're the ego. We're really got to make it happen. And
yeah,
that leads me into actually one of the questions I wanted to ask you. I had seen on your page where you posted, who am I? What is the now that thoughts arise into? And that's sort of a inquiry technique. And did you want to elaborate maybe on that a little bit? I think it kind of ties into what you were saying.
Yeah, so that one was, the question that I posed was, what is the now that your thoughts arise into? So the idea behind that question is that it's a pointer. It's to point awareness back to its source. Right? So if we think about let's do this. So when I ask you the question, what is the now that your thoughts arise into?
Can't really come up with an answer, I would say, other than silence.
Beautiful. Yeah. So so that's a good start. A lot of the times, people have some word, some answer. So that answer is just another thought, right?
Yes.
So the truth of who we are cannot be thought. It cannot be smelled. It cannot be tasted. It cannot be seen. It cannot be heard. I'm missing one in there. Seen, heard, thought, felt, tasted, smelled. So those are our 6 fields of perception that we have. but the true nature of reality cannot be perceived by any of those 6 sense fields. The phenomena in those fields arises into that now.
And would you say too, would you agree that, which is very tough, I think, to get to, but that the thought of I itself is also just a thought, just like anything else?
Yeah, just another thought.
I used to like, oh, go ahead.
So when we start this inquiry practice, basically the idea is to keep looking. Well, okay, so what's the now that the thoughts arise into? Well, it's, silence. Oh, and recognizing, oh, that's another thought. Keep looking prior to that. And eventually it brings the mind to a place of just stopping, because it's not something that can be cognized.
Yeah, I like some of the teachers in India that I would study, Nisargadatta Maharaj and Ramana Maharshi. They would basically say, when it comes to spiritual practice, they would say, don't do anything, just sit there and ask yourself, who am I? And just continue asking, who am I? And eventually, you'll get free in that manner. So that's, I know, another technique, and probably used in a lot of different philosophies, but I know in Indian philosophy, that's like jnana yoga, the yoga of wisdom and insight.
Yeah.
What I wanted to ask you then, a few more things, is one, you also teach meditation too, right?
Yeah.
So is your meditation, maybe you could tell us a little bit about, I mean, I don't know if you want to get into the specifics of what you teach, but just your ideas behind it, or how that integrates with your other philosophies, or even just what you think the benefits of meditation are. I mean, it kind of ties right into what we were just talking about, I feel like.
Yeah. The meditation, it's all integrated into these other practices, the martial arts, the healing arts. Just another method to continue cultivating the proper principles. So there's, I don't know, many different methods that I teach, and they are stage specific to an individual, based on where they're at, what we're going to focus on to help them take the next step in their understanding. Where I always start those with the concentration meditation. Are you familiar with that terminology?
No.
So it's also called not Vipassana, but there's, do you know this other term? There's Vipassana meditation, and then there's another term.
Is it a Buddhist term, mindfulness meditation, or no?
No. Anyways, so it's a practice where we start to build stability of attention. So first, cultivating stability of attention, so that our mind isn't going this way and this way, and so we do this practice of having an object of meditation, and we focus on that object of meditation. The mind wanders, we notice that it's wandered, and we return it back to the object of meditation. Over time, that builds stability, and so attention can rest undistractedly on that single object. From that point, we open up and start cultivating more clarity of our experience. So I believe this is Vipassana. And within the system of practice, the main system of practice that I went through, we called it choiceless awareness. But opening up through the various fields of awareness and becoming really clear in which field of perception, right? Which sense field is it? Is it a thought that's arising? Is it a body sensation that's arising? Is it a smell? Is it a taste? Whatever it is, kind of peeling apart this interweaving of various phenomena that's arising simultaneously that we all tie together, and it creates this very real seeming sense of a self, a world, and other, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we start to recognize phenomena as it arises in the field, because the issue with suffering is that we're not really paying close enough attention to what's actually happening. And there's these various thoughts that start linking together, that develop this whole story that's based off of these things that we see, hear, and feel. And it creates this very real seeming sense of self and this whole play. But by gaining clarity within what is actually arising, then we can start getting equanimity between all of these things that are arising. So I'd say those are the three main aspects of practice that we cultivate. And I think this is something that you can really see in pretty much all of the mystical traditions, is that cultivating stability of attention or concentration, cultivating clarity, and equanimity. And then from those, having those skills, then insight is something that naturally arises.
Because what I think it comes down to, what I've been realizing more and more, is just really to being here now. And those things all help me to stay present. If I'm focusing on my breath or the senses or whatever phenomena is arising in this present moment, and it helps me to more stay in the present rather than being kind of ran off of my trains of thoughts. Or what I've used a little bit as a discipline is I work in the recovery field, and so I'll be talking with people in sessions about whatever they're going through due to their addiction. And sometimes it'll be some pretty deep stuff. But I can still catch myself just with my thoughts going somewhere else about what I'm going to do when I leave work later, which is pales in significance to the importance of this person sharing this deep stuff with me. So I have to use it as a practice because the best thing I could really offer anybody is my presence. Just being aware and just listening to them is really the best thing I can offer.
Yeah.
So I seen also you had, we got a couple minutes left, right? You okay for a couple minutes?
Yeah. I'm happy to keep talking as long as you've got time.
All right. So
can I say one thing that I didn't really talk about with the martial arts that I think is important, is that conditioning gets held within the body. Mental conditioning gets held within the body. So my teacher says, you know how to spell body, right?
Yes.
M-I-N-D. So all of the areas of resistance that we have in the body
correlated with the mind.
It's something that our mind has not let go of. You know, we pick up a chair, and we have to tense these muscles to hold the chair, and then we put it down, but then we stand back up, and I'm still holding on here. I never let the chair down, right? I never let it go. So when we start these Taoist practices, it's about learning how to soften through the body, and all of those areas of stuckness we eventually melt away so that the body unifies. So it's these practices embody all of these spiritual principles that we talk about, right? Oneness, non-resistance, all of these things. It's applied philosophy. So we apply it to the body, and when we do that, it also transforms the mind. And I found this method. I had PTSD, I had addiction, and this practice, through working with the body, transformed all of those mental patterns. It it healed the trauma without having to go back and like talk about the trauma or, you know, relive the whole story, because the story is really a big part of the problem. So it kind of bypasses that aspect of it, and it just works with the energetic patterning and where we're actually holding on to those patternings.
Interesting, because I think a lot of times with pain and trauma and etc., we could get too caught in the psychological and sort of get attached to the narrative and really just keep miring in it. And that's, I think, could be one of the dangers in therapy and stuff. And like I said, I work in a field related to that, but I think that could be one of the dangers, is rather than letting it go and getting free from it, it could sort of get you mired more deeply into it sometimes, honestly.
Totally. Yeah.
So as you were talking about practice, I remember another thing you had shared on your thing was about authenticity and sustained practice, sustained spiritual practice. And so even though, so here's what I've always tried to integrate, I guess I could say, is the difference between, or not the difference, I would say more the harmonizing between sort of non-action, actually, I guess you could say, and sustained discipline and practice, because it could be an interesting thing to deal with, you know, because I know that I am ultimately the self already. And some people might say, like in Zen Buddhism, like, what are you looking for? You're already it. But also, I just said that, and that doesn't mean that I all of a sudden now I'm an enlightened. So there also is a practice, you know, a will and a practice sort of needed. So I don't know, do you have anything you'd like to say about that?
Yeah, beautiful question. It makes me think of a story that I was once told, and I can't remember who it was, but maybe you or one of your viewers has heard this. It's I think it's a fairly contemporary person. They may have passed away somewhat recently, but they had this question of well, if we're already Buddha, why do we need to practice?
Could
Right?
be Alan Watts, maybe, but I'm not positive.
Okay.
Does sound like
And eventually, this person awoke, and they had the realization that, well, practice is the action of Buddhas.
Oh, then it's not him. But okay.
So this idea of do non-doing, right, and of we do less and less until finally nothing is done, and then nothing is undone. So we practice to refine and exhaust, refine the character and exhaust the will. And so then practice happens through us. Practice, we're all always practicing something. Always. So most of us are unconsciously practicing habits that we don't really want to be practicing, you know? So practice is constant. There's no choice in that. But by focusing all of our attention, pouring all of our little self into spiritual practice, eventually the little self falls away. And what's left is uninhibited, unrestricted, constant practice.
It reminds me of, I like that. It reminds me of in Ram Dass's book, Be Here Now, he talks about doing spiritual practice, and he says, don't think of yourself as the one doing the practices. And then he also says that it's like the skin of a rattlesnake, that it has to shed on its own. You can't make it shed any quicker than it's going to shed already. And another thing I've kind of heard spirituality too compared to is sort of like a flower blooming, like it blooms. So yeah, I like how you're saying that it's sort of like a harmonizing between the effects. And I think too, I've wondered about spiritual practice, and I think once I started to, whatever you want to call it, once I started to wake up or get more conscious or become aware, whatever you want to call it, I really had but no choice to continue searching for truth and continue on a spiritual practice. I mean, it's almost like once it was set into motion, it was just has become an awakening process. No matter what I really do or try to do, my whole life is really everything I do. I'm thinking about it as spiritual practice throughout my day. I'm sort of thinking about God or whatever you want to call it. But it's began to, I guess you could say, permeate every area of my life, which is kind of like what you were saying.
Right. Yeah. So there's two main types of practice. There's the formal practice that we do, and then there's all the rest of the time, washing the dishes, eating food, whatever it is. That's all practice too.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. Most certainly. It's like everything in your life circumstance, everything that comes up in your life can totally be used. And so one other thing I did want to mention to you before we wrapped up, you have the balance boards also. And I didn't know what's the deal with the balance boards.
Well, those came about. So I during my birth, I broke my right clavicle, went undiagnosed for like 9 months. This clavicle is a different shape than this one. I never crawled. So basically I had a lot of spinal issues, physical issues growing up. I had scoliosis for a while. So finding this like left-right harmony in my body was like always something that was difficult for me.
Yeah.
And I went paddleboarding for the first time a couple years ago. And the paddleboard has this midline and this like left right kind of thing. And I was on there and I practiced some Qigong on there. And I was like, oh, whoa, my whole central channel was more aligned and opened. And so I was like, I want this more often. I want to be able to practice something like this more often. And, I didn't want to have to buy a paddleboard, have anywhere to store it, and like the whole hassle of going to find some water every time.
You made those,
especially when it's really cold. Yeah. So, well, first I bought one of, I don't know if I should say the brand name on here, but one of those other types of popular boards that has the rolling piece at the bottom, right?
Oh,
they're like, you know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm.
And I tried that, and because that piece at the bottom, the balance point moves, I found that if there's an imbalance in the system, it's just like way too easy to move the balance point to where that it actually favors that imbalance and then kind of reifies that pattern. Does that make sense?
Yes, a little bit. I get what you're saying.
So then I started playing around with how to fix the balance point in the center of the board, so then it is like a paddle board and has that left-right equilibrium. And that's how I developed these boards. And then I made my first one, and I was like, oh, I want to paint some sacred geometry on this thing. So, because sacred geometry is another aspect of alignment. I've used it as a meditation object and felt that as my mind oriented to these specific patterns, that the energy in my body also began to orient to those patterns. The chi of the body follows the mind intent. So I felt this harmonization just from staring at sacred geometry.
Wow.
And so I decided to put that on the board because it just felt right. And so that's kind of how they got birthed. And then when I started letting people use them, clients use them, and they found it beneficial for helping to rebalance those left-right imbalances in the body. And the type of balance point that I was using initially was too difficult for most people to start with. So then I developed this system of, I've actually got one here. So I developed this system of having a easier balance point that just pops off if you want to use the more difficult balance point, right? Because it's a smaller surface area here. So this is how I first started making them, but it was too difficult for the average person. So created this little cage system so that it was more accessible. And yep. So that's, I guess that's
yeah, that's cool. No, I will definitely. Well, I want to say about the sacred geometry. That's cool. I think it might be a sign I have to be looking into it more. 'Cause I've just recently read some books on sacred geometry, the ancient secret of the flower of life. I have a friend that has always been into drawing sacred geometry, etc. And earlier in my life, when he would try and talk to me about it, I wouldn't really listen, but I didn't really understand it or how it could benefit me. But it's been coming up a lot in my life recently, so I'm kind of trying to delve into that particular sort of teaching a little bit, because I mean it is basically the patterns and the building blocks of the universe, it's said to be, of everything.
Yeah, it's an interesting road to explore.
Yeah. So basically, as we wrap up, I kind of wanted to just, I'll put, I want to put your website and Instagram and everything in the description in case anybody wants to check out your stuff and everything like that. Basically, you offer meditation, martial arts, the boards, the massages. Anything else am I missing?
No, that's it. I mean, the craniosacral therapy. Yeah.
Cool. And you do, obviously you do in person, but you also do remote as well, right? I know your martial arts classes are remote and stuff.
Yeah, I've started recently trying out the Zoom thing. So yeah, I do in person or online. I'm thinking about adding a meditation class on Wednesday mornings, online meditation class on Wednesday mornings. Yeah, so far I'm only doing Qigong online, which is Tuesdays, Wednesdays at 6 p.m., Fridays at 9 a.m. But I also might start trying to teach some of the more martial arts forms, the Taichi, Bagwan, Xingyi also, maybe if I get interest from people.
Okay, yeah, I'm gonna have to look into some of that as well on your site, because I'd be interested probably for sure. Okay, cool. Well, if there's anything that you want me to include in there that I didn't, other than your Instagram and website, you could always just email it to me and I'll make sure to get it up in there. But thanks again. I mean, thanks so much for joining me and spending your time. I know I messed the little recording in the beginning, so thank you for going back. And I think it was beautiful. Everything you said was beautiful and definitely of a lot of interest to me.
Awesome. Thanks, man. Yeah, it's I really appreciate having the opportunity to share and talk with you, and I've enjoyed it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah. All right. I will definitely be in touch.
Good. Sounds